Yeah, I mean, the important point is that exercise, which is voluntary, planned physical activity for the sake of health and fitness, nobody did until recently. It's completely modern, abnormal behavior, like going to school. Like
Mm-hmm.
until recently, nobody else went to school either. Like, or read. I mean, reading is now literacy. We consider that to be, a human universal is really good, right? But until a few thousand years ago, almost nobody on the planet read. And like several thousand years ago, not a single human being read because it
Yeah.
hadn't been invented, right? But it doesn't mean it's so exercise, like education, is modern, but they're both good for us. And in the case of exercise, we've had to invent it to replace the fact that we're no longer physically active.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cell 14 podcast. Today, I got a very special guest with me, Dr. Daniel E. Lieberman. How's it going?
Good.
Good. Yeah. Dr. Lieberman is a professor at Harvard University. Kind of a more direct title is he's the Edwin M. Lerner II Professor of Biological Sciences, Professor of Human Evolutionary Biology. Is that correct?
That's me.
Yep. Thanks for coming on. I know you're very busy. Thank you for making the time.
My pleasure.
Mm-hmm. And so human evolutionary biology is an interesting subject. What made you get into it in the beginning? Was it like going to museums as a kid or further along in college?
Oh, gosh, it's very hard to answer that question. I think, I'm sure what got me interested in, apart from as a kid, was very lucky. I got to travel a lot and was always sort of interested in evolution. And but when I went to college as an undergraduate, I was going to be a geology major. Was quite sure of it. But where I went to Harvard as an undergraduate. They had something called freshman seminar program, and I ended up, I don't know, just on a lark, applying to a freshman seminar on human evolution. I didn't really know anything about it, and meanwhile, when I went to the geology department, they told me that since I knew I was going to be a geology major, they said, well, you should take the big core intro course, which was mineralogy and crystallography. So on the one hand, I was taking this really boring course on memorizing crystal structure of, various minerals. And then I took this fantastic freshman seminar with a wonderful professor named David Pilbeam and kind of fell in love with the theory of evolution and its power and utility for addressing really big questions. And then we ended up actually publishing a paper based on some of the research I did in that freshman seminar. And then I also got interested in archaeology, Paleolithic archaeology, especially under the spell of another professor, and started doing field work. And that was that. And then before I knew it, even though I was kind of thinking about medical school, I ended up getting this fellowship to go to Cambridge in England, and then got started doing work in Kenya. And I thought, gosh, if somebody would pay me to do this, sure, I'll do it. And just one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was in graduate school, and then here I am. So I never really planned it; it just kind of happened.
Mm-hmm. Life works in mysterious ways, I guess. One thing leads to another.
Well, I think the thing is to follow your passions, and I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to do that. Not everybody gets to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I took geology last semester. I'm still a college student, and it wasn't the best thing in the world for me. But I'm a business student currently, so I'm not really into science. But I like learning about it, not taking the tests per se, but just learning about different sciences is very interesting to me. And so, let's talk about like the human evolution, and let's start from the beginning. What did the Homo sapiens first stem from? Like, what was the distinction from before that and to what we are now?
Well, we are the species Homo sapiens, and we evolved sometime between 200 and 300,000 years ago in Africa. Mm-hmm. And there's a little bit of debate about who our ancestors were exactly. Most people consider the species a species called Homo heidelbergensis, which is in turn a descendant of the species Homo erectus. And then, you go back in time to eventually to our last common ancestor with the chimpanzees, which was about 7 million years ago, give or take, a million or so. So it's a long, complicated story, a very bushy tree with lots and lots of species that most of which went extinct. It's not like a linear thing with one species after the next, after the next, after the next. It's very complicated. So, for example, we evolved at the same time as Neanderthals. We're cousins. We evolved around the same time probably from a similar common ancestor. We interbred a little bit, even a teeny bit. So, just like there are tons of species of macaques and tons of species of squirrels and tons of species of, there used to be tons of species of humans on the planet. And it just happens to be today, there's only one of us. But that is it's the first time really in human evolutionary history, there's only been one species of hominid.
Mm-hmm. What led to only being just one species?
Well, that's a complicated question, and nobody knows the answer to that exactly. As humans spread out of Africa, so humans come from Africa. That's incontrovertible. There's no question about that. As humans spread out of Africa, it seems that other species that were living on the planet, whom we encountered as people started to disperse into Europe and to Asia, everywhere we went, everybody else went extinct. So whether it was because of direct competition, i.e. we killed them or something like that, or because of indirect competition, we simply just outbred them and they had trouble surviving. Nobody knows the answer to that.
Okay. And a theory of that would be natural selection, right?
Natural selection is just how evolution works. So it's extinction isn't caused by natural selection. I mean, per se, but natural selection is just an evolutionary process by which change occurs over time.
Okay. Like what's an example of that, like that you could give us?
Well, natural selection is occurring today in human beings, right? Natural selection is the result of variation, some of that variation being heritable, and that variation having effects on reproductive success. So individuals who have like very serious mutations that prevent them from surviving and reproducing don't pass that gene on to the next generation. So, or any of their genes on to the next generation, and that's natural selection. Whereas individuals who have genes that increase their reproductive success pass on more of those genes. So that natural selection is just like gravity. It happens all the time. It's like, there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah. Just part of the environment, part of the earth really to every species.
Well, it's not part of the earth, but it's just the logic of life.
Yeah. That's right.
It's not a solid thing. It's just a process.
Yeah. So how did diet contribute to the growth of humans? I know you've studied this.
All things have to eat things, right? So, I mean, we are an unusual species in terms of our diet because we're highly omnivorous. We until started. I mean, there's a very complicated and long story. There's not one dietary story, right?
Yeah.
But there are different points in our human evolutionary history where changes in diet drove selection and caused changes. But right now we are a very unusual creature that we are highly dependent on very energy-rich foods. We cook our food. We're the only animal on the planet that actually is obligate. We have to cook our food. If we don't, we get sick. We can't get enough energy. There are, of course, plenty of vegetarians on the planet today, but until recently, we were dependent on including animal products as part of our diet. That's also unusual for primates. So yeah, there are many, many, many shifts in our diet that were important in our evolutionary history.
What do you know an estimate of when the fire and cooked food became part of human evolution?
Well, that's a big debate. So there are some people, like my friend and colleague Richard Wrangham, who thinks fire began to be used around 2 million years ago. That's still kind of speculative. The oldest sort of archaeological evidence for fire that I think most archaeologists accept is around 1 million years old, but even then it's very rare. There are almost no examples in the archaeological record. What is clear is that starting around 400,000 years ago or so, fire became much more common. And so the regular use of fire to cook food really sort of coincides with a group of creatures we call archaic humans. So Homo heidelbergensis is one of them. And of course, it had huge effects on our evolutionary history. Changed our guts, changed our brains, changed all kinds of things. Because fire, once you have cooking, you can get a lot more energy from food. You can decrease the parasite load of food. It has changes our ability to be safe at night. So defend ourselves from predators. It was an extraordinary shift, but exactly when it happened, like so many other things in human evolution, it's very hard to pinpoint exactly without controversy.
Mm-hmm. So, like you said, fire became a big part of human evolution, and also the use of tools. Like most other species don't use tools. Like I look at chimpanzees, and they don't use like tools or as many tools as humans do, of course, but what allowed us to be different in that aspect?
Well, first of all, I mean, it used to be thought that humans are the only tool makers, and as you just mentioned, that's not true. Chimpanzees do use tools, and they do make tools. They're just not sophisticated. But there are species of crows that make tools. I mean, tool using is not unique to humans. It's just that we use them to much greater extent, and we're much more dependent on them. What enabled that is, must be a combination of cognitive evolution. So the ability to plan and think and innovate, right? Culture is obviously very important. I mean, just think about all the differences between the kinds of tools that cultures on the planet use, right? It's not that people in one culture are less intelligent than people in another culture. They just have different cultural traditions in terms of the tools that they use. So culture is also important. And then finally, the other manipulative abilities and sort of biomechanical abilities to make and use tools are also important. We have selection for long thumbs and shorter fingers, and for great, more of what's called a precision grip, and perhaps other shifts in our upper bodies that enabled us to make and use tools to throw things, for example. It's something that we've done a lot of work on in our lab. There are all kinds of modifications to our upper body that make us the only animal capable of throwing things hard and fast. That's a tool. So there's no single answer to that question. It's a variety of capabilities were selected for this.
Mm-hmm. And when did agriculture start playing a bigger impact in our biology?
When it was invented, right? So agriculture first shows up sometime, in different parts of the world at different times. It was invented at least 7 times in different parts of the world. The oldest agriculture we have so far comes from the sort of Western Asia, from sort of the Middle East, basically, sometime around 12,000 years ago. But around almost the same time in China, in parts of Eastern China. But agriculture, foods were domesticated also in Mesoamerica and South America and Eastern United States and in Africa. So possibly even in New Guinea. I mean, there's, it's not a single event that occurred in one place, and it didn't, just all of a sudden, transform. In every part of the world, the transition towards farming had a different sort of pathway. In some places, it was like a revolution and changed things really fast. In other places, there was a kind of a more gradual sort of adoption of domesticated foods, and every place has a different story. But obviously, it was transformative because farmers can have a lot more energy, right? The basic equation of life is energy in and babies out, and farmers are able to to get a lot more energy, they have to work harder to get it. And there's vulnerabilities that come with being a farmer and also lots of problems. But once you have more energy, then you can have more offspring. And when you have more offspring, you have larger population growth. And when you have larger population growth, then you get towns and cities, and then you also get infectious diseases like the one we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
And you get domesticated animals who also give us all kinds of diseases. And so farming came with blessings, but it also came with a lot of problems as well.
Mm-hmm. Because before that, it was more of a like hunting and gathering sort of situation, and that allowed us to really grow as a species tremendously. And like you said, right now, currently, we're going through a pandemic. The diseases also played like a big factor in evolution. Like some humans, a lot of humans actually died and continue to die from diseases. But the type of medical research that we have right now is fairly new. And so before any of the medical research, what were the effects on humans with no research to anything? When diseases like this occurred, what happened to them?
Well, I mean, of course, disease has been an extremely important force in human evolution, as it is in every species.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to realize that a lot of the diseases that we confront today that preoccupy most medicine are actually what we call mismatched diseases. That's what my last book is about, the story of the human body. They're diseases that are caused because we're inadequately or imperfectly adapted to the environments in which we now live. So, smallpox and influenza and the plague, and, the list is very, very long. Tuberculosis. These are all diseases that didn't occur until agriculture came around, because people didn't live in high enough population densities. They didn't get these diseases which transmitted from animals, because we didn't live cheek by jowl with cows and sheep and dogs and pigs and chickens and things like that.
Mm-hmm. So the closer together everything is, the more likely it is for diseases. Oh
yeah, it's just like COVID. If you're within 6 feet of somebody and you cough on them, you can give. But if there's nobody around you, you're not going to be able to transmit that disease. So high population densities are perfect for contagious diseases. But hunter-gatherers live in extremely low population densities. Just like back in the old days, if Manhattan were occupied by hunter-gatherers, instead of 7 million people being there, there'd be like a dozen, right? Yeah. In the entire island of Manhattan, maybe less. Mm-hmm. But also you have to realize that the hunter-gatherers also, they don't eat crappy food; they eat healthy food. There's no McDonald's, there's no Coca-Cola, there's no sugar, etc. So the kinds of chronic diseases that people get today, hunter-gatherers don't get. Now, it's not that they don't get sick. Of course they get sick. They get diarrhea, can get malaria, etc. There are diseases that come from say, insect-borne diseases, etc. But hunter-gatherers who survive childhood tend to live into their 70s. Once farming came, people started dying earlier. And it's only with the invention of modern medicine that human lifespan got back up to where we used to be when we were hunter-gatherers. But the biggest effects on disease have not been medicine, actually. It's been sanitation. So if you look at when life expectancy started to increase, it was primarily because of the invention of sewers and toilets and clean water, and things like vaccines, etc., have had an important effect, but much less of an effect than basic sanitation. So that's been the most important factor in the extension of human life is sanitation and public health. Medicine, of course, is important, but not as important as we think it is.
What are some of the things we could take from like the hunter-gatherers, how they lived, and mix it in with our society?
Well, there are a lot of people who'd like to apply hunter-gatherer lifeways in a very kind of simplistic way and think that basically if you live as much as possible like a hunter-gatherer, you'll be healthier. That's the kind of fallacy of the paleo diet, right? If you eat like a caveman, you're going to like live forever. But that's problematic because not just because our ancestors did something doesn't mean it made them healthy. Because remember, what does natural selection care about? It cares about reproduction, right? And so we're only selected to be healthy insofar as health promotes reproductive success. So So there are a lot of things that we like that are good for our reproductive success, which might not necessarily be good for long-term health, like eating sugar. Like everybody loves sugar.
Mm-hmm.
Hunter-gatherers love sugar. They don't get it in the quantities we get because they get it from honey primarily. They can't go to the local store and get a bag of sugar, but they love it just as much as we do. They also love, meat. And there are, some paleo diet folks who seem to think that saturated fat has no negative health effects, but that's just wrong. There's plenty of evidence that large quantities of saturated fat have negative health consequences. So eating like a caveman is not the solution. That said, there are a lot of things that we eat today, which and there are a lot of things you can learn about their effects by looking at variations in diet across the planet. And it's not particularly complicated. Basically processed foods that are low in fiber and high in sugar and high in saturated fat are pretty bad for us. And we're adapted to eat a diet that's high in fiber. We're adapted to eat a diet that's high in nutrients. We're adapted to eat a diet that's not all that high in saturated fat. And we get in trouble when we eat a crappy diet, modern diet, and also. You combine that with things like smoking, with physical inactivity, stress, we run into trouble.
Yeah.
But your grandmother knows that, right? You don't need a professor to tell you that. Don't smoke, exercise, and don't eat crap. I mean, it's...
yeah. Just be healthy.
It's not being healthy, it's easy to say be healthy, but what it is that is to be healthy is not entirely obvious, but it's pretty obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like some of the things you mentioned. And so, like, I want to talk about exercise. I know you're known for running barefoot. What was the process behind that you got involved in into doing that? Because most people, they think running barefoot, why would I do that when there are shoes, and that these shoes claim that it's better support for your arc and everything?
Well, I like to try what I study. So in 2004, a colleague of mine, Dennis Bramble, and I published a paper in the journal Nature entitled Born to Run, actually. And it was we made the case that endurance running, long distance running, played an important role in human evolution. We have all kinds of adaptations in our bodies, literally from our heads to our toes, that help us be really good at long distance running. And since I'm an evolutionary biologist, sort of the next question really was, well, how did we run back in the old days before modern shoes? And so I work in Africa, and of course in Africa, it's not hard to find people who run a lot, and it's also not hard to find people who don't wear shoes. And so started studying barefoot runners in Africa and also here in America. And not so much because it's like some magical thing that will, make you healthy. I'm not one of those folks, but I decided to try it because I thought it'd be interesting. And I also wanted to learn what you could learn from barefoot running. I just like to try what I study. So quite literally, I think the first time I ran barefoot, of course, everybody runs barefoot when they're a kid in the yard and on the beaches and stuff like that. But I think the first time I ran barefoot on a road was, it must have been, it was sometime in sort of 2006 or 2007 after I'd come back from a trip to Africa. I was really jet lagged. It was early in the morning. It was a beautiful day. And I was sort of thinking about it. I just took my shoes off just to see what it was like. And I discovered I liked it. And because people are sort of scared of their bodies. They don't understand how their bodies work. And it's actually not a big deal. It's completely trivial to run barefoot. If you do it too much, you'll hurt yourself because you need calluses and you need to learn to run properly. But, if you run for a quarter mile barefoot down a road, you're not going to do anything bad to yourself. And I discovered it was fun and it actually felt good. So I started doing it, and also I was studying it, and I like to run. And so, I just kept trying it. But I don't do it for any reason other than I enjoy it. Yeah. I don't think you need to be barefoot to be a good runner. And I think you can obviously wear shoes and do just fine. And you can also be barefoot and hurt yourself. It's not a panacea. It's not a magic bullet. But I think you can learn a lot about running from studying barefoot running, because that's obviously how we evolved to run. Does that mean we should do it necessarily? Of course not. We also didn't evolve to have refrigerators. We didn't evolve to have chairs. We didn't evolve to have, sterile surgery. We didn't evolve to have antibiotics. We didn't evolve to have all kinds of good things.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like you can just, it's complicated. Everything's complicated. And most of the time, by the way, when I run, I wear shoes. I do not run barefoot most of the time.
Because, we stemmed from, like, there were no shoes back then. So we had to just walk with nothing really. And, but nowadays with concrete and roads and stuff, back then we didn't have any of that stuff. And it was just in the grass or on dirt.
There are still plenty of people on the planet all over the world today who still are barefoot, who don't have shoes. So it's not even just back then. Mm-hmm. We have this, one of the problems with the world today is that we have this overly westernized view of what is normal, right? I think it's normal to be an American, to wear shoes and to sit on chairs with seat backs and all that kind of stuff. But none of this is normal. And it's only a small percentage. We're only a small sliver of the world. But if you go to lots of places, India, Africa, Asia, you'll see tons of barefoot people. There's nothing unusual or weird about it. And they're not all in pain and having trouble. In fact, they probably have pretty healthy feet on the whole.
Yeah. I've been to India 4 times now. And when I'm over there, I just use like either sandals or like a light shoe because, I enjoy it over there. Most of the people don't really wear shoes there either. And they prefer it that way.
That's correct. I've traveled in parts of India. We sort of did some research there looking for barefoot tribal runners in certain parts of the country. And India is full of barefoot people. They're, but people also like shoes. Shoes are comfortable. There's a reason people wear shoes. There's no question of it, but everything is trade-offs. As an evolutionary biologist, I can tell you everything involves in trade-offs. There are costs and benefits to everything, and shoes are no exception.
Mm-hmm. Humans nowadays are way less inactive. Like just now they're active, but they're less inactive as in going out and hunting and farming. They're mostly like the westernized humans are sitting in offices for hours a day. What kind of impact has this made on our bodies of just sitting for hours and staring at screens?
I think you kind of know the answer by the way you're asking the question. I mean, we all know that physical activity is profoundly important for health. That's the subject of the book I'm just publishing called Exercised. I mean, we didn't evolve to be crazy active. Typical hunter-gatherers engage in about 2.25 hours a day of sort of moderate to vigorous physical activity. But, that involves, walking 5 to 9 miles a day, digging for hours, climbing trees, sometimes running, and they do that throughout their life. And so you don't, that's sort of normal for human beings. And it was for millions of years. All of a sudden now we've just removed that right from our environment, right? So you can wake up if you're American and never raise your heart rate all day long and never break a sweat. And the average American probably engages in less than half an hour of moderate to vigorous physical activity a day. So some even less than that. And as we get older, people even are less active. And there are numerous reasons why that's a huge risk factor for a variety of diseases. But the most important is that physical activity is a stress, but it's a good stress. Mm-hmm. It turns on body's repair and maintenance mechanisms that otherwise don't get turned on. So people who are less physically active are much, much more vulnerable to a wide range of diseases: diabetes, heart disease, various cancers, Alzheimer's, depression, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis. The list is extremely long. Mm-hmm. And so, so I would say that, people often say that exercise is medicine, which is sort of true, but really a better statement is that lack of physical activity, lack of exercise is actually harmful. Because our bodies are not adapted to that, especially as we age. So, constant, persistent physical inactivity is one of the major contributors to death and disease in the modern world today. And that's the bad news. The good news is that it doesn't take much to turn that around. If you can, the World Health Organization, there are numerous huge studies which show that even, just half an hour, 20 minutes to 30 minutes a day of physical activity can lower your rate of death by 50%.
Wow.
I mean, so you don't need that much, right? Even 60 minutes a week has beneficial effects. And of course, if you do more, it has even better effects. Of course, the effects tail off. So eventually, you don't get much, running marathons is not, you don't need to run marathons to be healthy. But that's not novel. Everybody knows that exercise is healthy. But what we're trying to figure out is why exercise is healthy, and not just the mechanisms, but also what's the underlying evolutionary mechanism.
Yeah. And I go to the gym almost every day, and every time I'm working out or running or doing anything physical, like my whole body just vibrants up and I feel better after it. There's just some connection there. I don't know the science behind it.
Read the book. You'll learn all this, all the science behind it in the book. I try to outline it in a fair amount of detail. But yes, of course. But the problem is that if you're not fit, if you're not used to going to the gym, it isn't any fun and it doesn't feel any good. And most of us, when I go for a run in the morning, I don't enjoy the first mile ever. I mean, nobody does. It's hard, right? It's work. It's arduous. It makes you hot and bothered or whatever. And but I never come back from a run or a workout or whatever, not having glad that I did it in the first place. But the reward comes afterwards, not before. And I think that's one of the things that's so difficult for people, because it's an instinct to be inactive, right? It's an instinct. This idea of exercise, going to a gym, is a really bizarre and weird thing, right? Like a treadmill. You said you work on a treadmill. I mean, try to explain to your great-grand. Yeah.
Even like steppers, like, it just rotates stairs and.
Yeah, but these are all machines, right? Try to explain to like one of your great-grandparents, and I don't know if you're a guest from India or whatever, that you pay money to go to a gym to work on a machine that makes you get nowhere and get nothing done. Or you lift weights whose sole purpose is to be lifted. They would think you're just a total nutcase, right? It makes no sense, right? Why not just go out and work in the fields or whatever, do the things that we evolved to do, right?
Yeah, so it's actually productive other than just working out. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the important point is that exercise, which is voluntary, planned physical activity for the sake of health and fitness, nobody did until recently. It's completely modern, abnormal behavior, like going to school. Like until recently, nobody else went to school either. Or read. I mean, reading is now literacy. We consider that to be, a human universal, is really good, right? But until a few thousand years ago, almost nobody on the planet read, and several thousand years ago, not a single human being read, because it hadn't been invented, right? But it doesn't mean it's So exercise, like education, is modern, but they're both good for us. And in the case of exercise, we've had to invent it to replace the fact that we're no longer physically active. And that's part of the problem, is because until recently, nobody did physical activity unless they needed to, because they already were physically active, and extra physical activity would have been a stupid idea, right?
Yeah, waste of energy.
Exactly. Yeah. Nobody in the Stone Age went for a 5-mile run in the morning. It was really, it'd be nutcase, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think as humans evolved, we got more and more comfortable. Like instead of walking, we wanted to ride a horse, and then that was too slow. Let's make a car and drive that. And then planes now. And as
that's cultural evolution. That's not biological evolution.
Yeah.
So that's all very recent, blink of an eye kind of stuff, right? That's all cultural evolution. There's nothing biological about it. But the basic instinct to save energy in you or me is no different than somebody, 10,000 years ago. It's just that we've created all these new technologies that enable us to be physically inactive, like cars and elevators and shopping carts and all those sorts of things. But our instincts haven't changed.
Yeah. We still want to stay active. Like that's why we go
No,
to.
we don't. No, we don't. That's the problem. Most people don't want to stay active.
Oh, okay.
Most people want to be inactive. They don't. We evolved to be physically active when it was necessary or when it was fun. But again, the idea of going to a gym is a preposterous, bizarre thing, and then we shame and blame people for thinking that they ought to want to go to a gym. But that's not how it works. So no, I disagree. I think that we've kind of made it a virtue. We've added sort of all kinds of signaling to a bizarre modern thing that is instinctively challenging for people, and we need to understand that and be compassionate about it rather than judgmental.
So
comfort. We love comfort.
So do you think like gyms are beneficial or
of course
not?
they're beneficial,
Okay.
but let's just not pretend that it's like normal to go to a gym and that anybody who's like sensible should want to go to a gym. It's a very strange thing.
It's more of a recent thing that just occurred because we have gotten so used to comfort that it's affecting our bodies in a negative way now that we have
It is, but it's also like, who goes to the gym, right? I'll make a bet. It's like mostly young guys like you, right? Or people who are like really concerned about their health, and it's also people who have means and opportunity. I mean, for the first time in one thing that this pandemic has exposed is just how the inequalities in people's access, not just to health care, but also to healthy health. If you're struggling to make ends meet and you have like long commutes and you have several jobs, you can't go to the gym, or you can't afford to go to the gym. And people live in environments where there are no sidewalks and there are no playgrounds or they're dangerous. And so actually it's a privilege for a very small percentage of Americans to go to gyms, but the vast majority can't go to gyms or are unable to go to gyms. And during this lockdown, it's gotten even worse. And it's not normal, and it's still a challenging thing, and we're not going to solve the problem of the world in terms of exercise by through gyms. There's nothing wrong with gyms. Gyms are fine if that's what you like to do. That's great. But there are other simpler solutions, like just walking or dancing with friends or going for a jog, which you don't need any special equipment for, and because we've commodified and medicalized it, right? So gym is the ultimate in industrialization and commodification of something very simple and basic, which is physical activity. In this modern Western world, I see you've got a picture of, was it Michael Jordan behind you? Again, another example of sort of industrialization, corporatization of physical activity. We now have sports teams, right? And we've conflated sports with exercise. Sports are an exercise. For the most people, sports are watching other people get physical activity.
And it became just like you said, a bigger event more than just like simple things like running and dancing. And when it could be that simple, we've made it to be much bigger than that.
Well, we've corporatized it and commodified it, industrialized it, and we've made it into entertainment, right? Billions of people watch the Super Bowl, right? Two armies basically clashing into each other, getting injured. I'm not opposed to football, but let's be honest, it's not a particularly healthy sport, right? And it's but it's a sport, it's not exercise.
And like you mentioned, you have a new book coming out. You talk about evolutionary approaches to exercising would be more beneficial. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, it's not that you should pretend to be a caveman when you exercise, but my point is that the reason the book is entitled Exercised. Here, let me just show you I'm just going to get the book. Hold on.
All right.
And you can see what it looks like, right? So the cover has a guy on a treadmill, sort of like a Paleolithic art kind of thing of a guy on a treadmill. The reason is, to me, the apotheosis of our modern weird approach to exercise is the treadmill, a machine that makes you have to pay to get on, to makes you work hard to get nowhere, right? And there's nothing wrong with a treadmill. I have a treadmill in my basement, and I use it sometimes too, and I put people on treadmills for a living, etc. But the book is not about an evolutionary sort of how to exercise from an evolutionary perspective. It's the reason I entitled the book Exercise is that people are literally exercised about exercise. People are confused. They feel shamed. They feel blamed. They feel unsure what to do, how much to do, what's the right way to do it. And the vast majority of Americans don't exercise. Only 20% of Americans actually exercise in their leisure time.
Wow.
That's a very small percentage, right?
So,
but it's not that they don't know that they should exercise or would benefit from it, but they can't, or they don't. It's difficult for them to do it, or
it's not a priority for them.
Well, or they, it's complicated. It's not, for many people, they can't. I mean, they don't have money, they don't have time. So we need to take, clearly the approach that we've taken to exercise in our society isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
Medicalizing and industrializing and commercializing exercise, there's nothing wrong with any of those things, but it's not solving the problem for most people. And people are also confused. One day they read about how, barefoot running is good for them. And the next day they read that they should wear shoes, and they read that running is bad for their knees, and they read that they can't lose weight by walking. And they wonder, if sitting is the new smoking, why is it when I look at pictures of people around the world, they're always sitting? And, and I want it. You can't exercise all day long. And should I have a standing desk? And how much should I sleep? And the list goes on and on and on and on, right? About things that people don't understand. And the reason that people are confused is that we have a terrible way of explaining to people how and why our bodies work the way they do, and how to do a better job. So my goal in this book is to help us rethink exercise. And the reason I'm using an evolutionary anthropological approach is that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Evolution is the only thing that explains why things are the way they are. We weren't designed, we weren't invented, we evolved. And if you want to understand why exercise is important, or why physical activity is important, we need to understand that. We should also understand that, the modern Western people like you and me are abnormal, and that you can't just judge the world based on, Americans, especially college students, brought into a gym, right? You need to go out and see how people in the real world use their bodies and understand that. Yeah. So I think that if you take this sort of evolutionary and anthropological approach, it helps you understand better.
You get a better perspective, a broader perspective.
Because I use actually an appropriate perspective that helps kind of so every single chapter in the book tackles a different myth about exercise. Okay. So I'm hoping that we can get people to think better about exercise, and the book is written as much for people who are ambivalent about exercise as it is for people who like to exercise.
Yeah, and it's great that you wrote this book from that kind of perspective, because I don't think a lot of people understand it from that perspective. So when does the book come out, or is it already released?
So it's out in the UK, but it'll be out in the US on January 5th.
Okay. You heard it there, ladies and gentlemen. January 5th. Can they pre-order it right now?
Yes, you can get it right now on Amazon, for example.
Yeah. I'll leave a link in the description for that. And I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate this conversation. I hope a lot of you listening also enjoyed it, learned a little bit, and make sure to check out the book.
Okay, my pleasure. Take care.
Yeah.